Isabella Hartley never imagined her perfect love story would twist into a nightmare. She was only 24, pregnant, fragile, and craving the forever love she thought she had secured. But one rainy, windswept night, her husband Marcus hurled her onto the freezing streets, tearing her world apart in one brutal instant. He had no clue that the shy, broke young woman he threw away was actually the only heiress to a multi-billion-dollar legacy. With her heart shattered and a baby to protect, Isabella vowed she would rise stronger, and when she returned, she would make sure Marcus paid for every tear she shed. No one would ever forget her name again. To outsiders, Isabella Hartley seemed like any ordinary girl. She lived in a tiny studio apartment in Portland, worked part-time at a quaint local bookstore, and attended evening classes at the community college. She liked blending into the background, safe in her simple routines, pretending she was just another girl with small dreams and second-hand clothes. It gave her a fragile sense of control in a world that had already taken too much. Her soft-spoken nature and quiet smile made people overlook her easily, especially Marcus Hartley. Her husband never once guessed the truth, that behind her simple life lay an inheritance few could even dream of. On her late mother's side was the powerful Lancaster family, a dynasty with investments spanning continents. Isabella's life looked humble, but in the shadows was her father, Edward Lancaster, a legendary billionaire investor with a hand in global real estate, cutting-edge tech, and major corporations. Yet Edward had been estranged from Isabella and her mother since she was a little girl, his obsession with wealth driving a wedge too deep to mend. Isabella's mother, Eleanor Lancaster, had fiercely protected her daughter from the cold arrogance of high society. They built a quiet life, free from bodyguards and lavish galas, while Edward expanded his empire across the world. Eleanor taught Isabella that money could fix broken things, but could never buy safety from heartbreak. Losing her mother 3 years ago left a raw wound that still throbbed when the nights were too quiet. She became the sole owner of a fortune so large it could shake the city's financial elite. But to honor her mother's wish for an ordinary life, Isabella hid it all. She lived cautiously, drawing no attention to her last name, never flashing the wealth that was hers by birthright. All she wanted was a taste of normal, just for a while. She truly believed she had managed to live that ordinary life, until she met Marcus. Marcus worked in corporate sales at a mid-sized car dealership downtown, and his charm was impossible to ignore. He was tall, carried himself with an easy swagger, and flashed a smile that could make anyone feel special. When Isabella walked into that dealership to buy a used car, one she could have easily paid for outright, she kept her true finances discreet, as always. Marcus was immediately captivated by her soft beauty and quiet grace. Within weeks, they were inseparable. And 6 months later, they sealed their whirlwind romance with a quick wedding at the county courthouse. For a while, Isabella felt like she was living every dream she'd ever held close to her heart. She was certain Marcus loved her for who she was, not for anything she might have hidden. She adored his jokes, his big plans, his restless energy. When Isabella discovered she was pregnant, Marcus acted thrilled, promising to be a solid provider and a devoted father. His paycheck wasn't impressive, but his ambition burned bright. He constantly spoke about someday hitting it big, moving up the ranks, providing her with the life she deserved. Isabella admired his drive and never once thought of revealing her own hidden wealth. But after they were married, cracks slowly broke open in the perfect picture she clung to. Marcus began tossing sharp comments about how little she earned at the bookstore. He pushed her to pick up extra shifts, grumbling about rent and the mounting costs a baby would bring. Meanwhile, he spent freely on himself. Sleek suits, fancy dinners with clients, expensive weekends under the excuse of networking. Yet every time Isabella treated herself, even to prenatal vitamins or a simple coffee at her favorite cafe, Marcus found a reason to complain. Their tiny one-bedroom apartment turned heavy with tension as her pregnancy advanced. She did everything in her power to keep the peace, swallowing the nausea, the exhaustion, and the creeping dread of what her future might really look like. She repeated to herself like a prayer that once the baby was born, everything would be okay again. Marcus would change back. Love would heal them. Even as the man she married turned into someone she barely recognized, she forced herself to believe. But one stormy night, 6 months into her pregnancy, the truth hit her like a bolt of lightning splitting the sky. Rain battered the windows, thunder shook the walls, and Marcus stumbled through the door long past midnight, reeking of alcohol and something far worse, another woman's perfume. Isabella's heart dropped at the smell that clung to him, proof she could no longer ignore. His tie was crooked, his hair disheveled, a mess she'd never seen before. "What happened to you?" she whispered. One protective hand pressed over her swollen belly as she stepped closer to help him slip out of his soaked jacket. "Don't touch me," he snarled, ripping his arm away from her grasp. "You think you're so special just because you're pregnant, like I owe you everything now?" Marcus slurred, his eyes glassy with rage. "I don't understand," Isabella whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "You said you were meeting a client. You smell like—" "Don't start with me," he snapped, jabbing a finger so close she could feel his knuckle brush her cheek. "I'm not in the mood for your nagging tonight. Do you have any idea how pathetic it makes me look? Married to some bookstore clerk who can't even hold down a real job? My coworkers laugh at me behind my back." She drew a shaky breath, fighting the urge to collapse. "Marcus, we're partners. I'm doing everything I can. We're having a baby, remember? I'm saving every penny. I'm supporting you." "Save money?" He barked out a bitter, sloppy laugh, swaying dangerously close to her. "What money, Isabella? And now you've got a baby on the way. Perfect. Just another mouth I can't afford to feed." She had never seen him like this, so raw, so hateful, so cruel. "Marcus." Her voice broke as tears flooded her cheeks. "What are you saying? You wanted this baby. You told me you were happy." He sneered. "Yeah, well, maybe I changed my mind. What have you ever done for me, huh? I'm stuck in this crummy apartment paying your bills while you prance around like you matter. You've never brought anything real to the table." "That's not true," she shot back, surprising herself with a flicker of courage. "I never asked for anything fancy. I've paid my share of the rent, the groceries, the bills." But before she could finish, Marcus lunged for her old suitcase propped in the corner. He yanked open their tiny closet and began ripping her clothes off hangers, shoving them inside without care. "Marcus, what are you doing?" Isabella gasped, frozen in shock. "I'm done. Get out. I can't stand looking at you another second." "Please, calm down, Marcus, I'm pregnant," she pleaded, reaching for his arm, but he jerked away, tossing the overstuffed suitcase to the floor with a loud, final thud. "Pack your crap and go. I have enough headaches without a whining pregnant wife dragging me down," he snarled, pointing at the door like she was nothing. Isabella's head spun. It was like watching her world implode through a fog she couldn't clear. She tried to reason with him one last time, but he didn't even hear her. Instead, he grabbed her by the shoulders and shoved her hard toward the door. She stumbled, arms wrapping instinctively around her belly to shield the tiny life growing inside her. The storm outside roared louder than her sobs. Marcus flung the door open and shoved her out into the pounding rain without a shred of regret. Her suitcase skidded across the porch behind her. The door slammed shut with a force that rattled her bones. Wind whipped her soaked hair across her face, rain mixing with hot, unstoppable tears. Isabella stood alone on the stoop, her body trembling in the dark. She was betrayed, abandoned, terrified, and there was nowhere left to go, except back to the past she'd tried so hard to leave behind. As thunder cracked overhead, Isabella gripped her suitcase with one hand, her other hand protectively pressed to her belly. Her suitcase gripped tightly in one hand, her other hand pressed protectively over her belly. Isabella stood in the storm as anger and heartbreak battled inside her. She had done everything to be the quiet, supportive wife, the ordinary, forgettable woman Marcus thought he could throw away without consequence. If only he knew the truth. If only he knew how easily she could crush him with a single phone call. But tonight wasn't about revenge. Tonight was about survival. Isabella turned her back on the apartment that had once held all her dreams and stepped into the raging storm, one foot in front of the other. Marcus would regret this betrayal. Of that, she was certain. And when the moment came for him to pay, she would stand tall, holding the secret weapon he never imagined she possessed. After Marcus kicked her out, Isabella found shelter at a run-down motel on the outskirts of Portland. She paid for the small, musty room in cash, grateful for the tiny emergency stash she'd always kept hidden. Her pregnancy was beginning to show, but her youthful face made strangers question if she was really old enough to be carrying a child. Alone in the stillness of that cold, unfamiliar room, the truth crashed over her. She was alone, pregnant, and heartbroken. But she wasn't poor. Not by a long shot. At sunrise, Isabella drew a shaky breath and dialed a number she almost never used. For a moment, it rang through to voicemail. She almost hung up, but seconds later her phone vibrated in her palm. A familiar, gentle voice crackled on the other end. "My dear, is that you?" The voice belonged to Harold Whitman, her mother's trusted attorney and family confidant for nearly 40 years. He was one of the precious few who knew Isabella's true identity and the fortune she had hidden away all these years. "Mr. Whitman," she said softly, her voice raw and hoarse. I need your help." Within an hour, he pulled into the motel parking lot, stepping out of a spotless black sedan. His silver hair glowed under the early morning sun, and despite the ungodly hour, he wore a crisp charcoal suit and an air of quiet authority. He took one look at Isabella, her puffy eyes, the way her hand cradled her belly, and his lined face tightened with concern. "My dear," he murmured, voice warm with an ache only old friends can carry. "I heard whispers you'd married in secret. I so hoped it would bring you joy, but now I see." She couldn't stop the tears this time. "He threw me out, Mr. Whitman," she choked out. "He doesn't even know who I really am. I never told him about my family, or the inheritance." Harold's eyes softened. He had watched Isabella grow from a shy little girl into the woman standing before him now. He had promised Eleanor Lancaster, Isabella's mother, he would protect her daughter's birthright until the time was right. "I'm so sorry, my dear," he said, his voice quivering with genuine sorrow. "What do you want to do now?" Isabella rubbed at her swollen eyes, her mind racing. Whatever came next wasn't just for her anymore. It was for the child she carried inside her. "I need a place to stay," Isabella whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. I think I'm finally ready to step into the world my mother left for me. No more hiding." Harold Whitman nodded solemnly, his kind eyes full of understanding. "It's your birthright," he said softly. "Your mother always wanted you to have the freedom to choose. She never wanted wealth to cast a shadow over your life, or for family conflict to poison your peace. But life has forced you to face harsh truths alone. Maybe now, it's time to gather what's yours." Isabella swallowed hard, flashes of her father's cold fortune flickering through her mind. She'd spent her whole life yearning for normal, not luxury. But that dream had shattered. "Yes," she said firmly, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm ready." Within hours, Harold had guided Isabella to a discreet penthouse in downtown Portland, a property once owned by her mother but left empty for years. The high-rise towered above the city, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of the river and skyline. Marble floors gleamed under the soft light, and sleek, minimalist decor filled each airy room. It was far grander than the tiny apartment she'd shared with Marcus. The sheer size made her chest tighten. "It's too much," she whispered, stepping into the vast living room, her eyes tracing the horizon through the endless glass walls. Harold came to her side, his presence steady and comforting. "You own this place, Isabella. Make it whatever you want, simple or lavish. But above all, you deserve to feel safe here, especially now." Her hand drifted to her belly, warmth blooming through her chest. For the first time in days, her tears weren't from grief, but from relief. She wasn't alone. Her baby wasn't alone. They had a roof over their heads, a place untouched by Marcus's cruelty. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman," she murmured, her voice breaking just slightly. He placed a new set of keys gently in her hand. "I've made sure the refrigerator is stocked. I'll arrange for a housekeeper if you'd like. And remember, the Lancaster estate is extensive. There are resources waiting for you any time you wish to access them." Isabella nodded, recalling her mother's quiet wisdom. Money fixes practical troubles, but never heals the heart. Right now, her heart was still raw. But at least her basic needs, her safety, her child's security, were no longer uncertain. In the days that followed, Isabella began adjusting to her new reality. She picked out a small, spare room and turned it into a nursery, carefully choosing soft, neutral colors since she still didn't know if she was carrying a boy or a girl. She wandered through shops like Pottery Barn Kids and upscale baby boutiques, overwhelmed by how easily she could buy anything she wanted, yet humbled by her mother's memory, whispering reminders of quiet simplicity. More than once, standing in an aisle surrounded by tiny clothes and blankets, she nearly broke down, the sting of Marcus's betrayal fresh behind her eyes. Then, one quiet morning, as sunlight streamed across the marble floors, Isabella heard an unexpected knock at her door. She opened the door and found Laura Simmons, a reporter from the Portland Business Ledger, standing there with a photographer hovering behind her. Laura had once been an acquaintance of Isabella's father, Edward Lancaster, and somehow she had sniffed out that Isabella was back in the Lancaster circle. "Miss Hartley," Laura greeted her smoothly from the threshold, dressed sharply in a tailored blazer, notepad already in hand. "Or should I say Miss Lancaster? I apologize for showing up without notice, but we've been trying to reach you regarding your father's latest investment deal. Do you have any comment on the rumors that you might be stepping into a more active role within the Lancaster holdings?" Isabella's stomach twisted into a tight knot. She had no plans to make any public statements. "I'm sorry," she said evenly, keeping her voice calm and polite. "I'm not giving interviews at this time." Before Laura could press further, Isabella closed the door gently but firmly, shutting out the volley of questions that followed. Her father's empire had never been her concern. At least, that's what she had convinced herself for years. Yet hearing his name still made old anxiety bubble to the surface. Part of her dreaded ever having to face him again. Another part whispered that, if she really wanted to stand on her own feet in this new world, she might not have a choice. That evening, Isabella faced the thought head-on while sitting with Harold in the penthouse's softly lit living room. She cupped her hands around a mug of decaf tea, careful for the baby's sake. "What about my father?" she asked quietly. "Does he know I'm here?" Harold let out a weary sigh. "I've kept him informed of your well-being, always with your mother's blessing. Since she passed, I've sent him occasional updates. He's aware you're staying here now. Whether he chooses to reach out, that I can't promise." Isabella closed her eyes, a ghost of old memories stirring inside her chest. Edward Lancaster had appeared in her childhood like a phantom, lavish gifts on birthdays, sudden visits that ended just as quickly. She never believed his affection was real. It always felt more like an obligation than true love. In the end, Eleanor had cut him out for good, determined to protect Isabella from his cold influence. But fate had a cruel sense of humor, and now it seemed he might reappear whether she liked it or not. In the weeks that followed, Isabella's phone began to ring with calls from unknown numbers she let go to voicemail. Letters arrived, formal and handwritten invitations to Lancaster family events she never even knew existed. The Portland social scene hummed with whispers. The long-lost daughter of Edward Lancaster was back, pregnant, alone, and perhaps about to become the new face of the Lancaster legacy. Isabella, meanwhile, had no desire to get swept up in the glittering social swirl that now buzzed around her name. Her mind stayed firmly on her baby's health and on rebuilding her own emotional strength piece by piece. Still, every time she thought of Marcus, a quiet burn of anger and sadness flared inside her. He had thrown her away like she was nothing. He had no clue how much she had given up just to stand beside him, how she had hidden her inheritance so he wouldn't feel small in her shadow. And now here she was, living high above the city in a penthouse filled with resources he could never begin to afford. Sometimes, in the silent hours before dawn, she wondered if he would crumble if he knew just how powerful she truly was, and if he would hate himself for losing her. But deep down, she doubted he had that much self-awareness left. If only he knew. To quiet her restless mind, Isabella buried herself in parenting books, practiced gentle prenatal stretches every morning, and poured out her thoughts to Harold whenever he visited. She found comfort in the old man's calm nods, the way he never judged her for spilling secrets she had buried for so long. During one of those calm talks, Harold cleared his throat, folding his hands neatly on his knee. "Isabella," he began gently, "there's one more matter we ought to address, your mother's will. Now that you're settled in one of her properties, it's the right moment to go through it properly. Isabella nodded, a tiny flicker of anxiety prickling her ribs. Of course. What did she plan? Before she passed, Harold explained, his tone careful but kind, she established a trust fund to be activated when your first child is born. That baby will inherit a substantial portion of the Lancaster holdings, enough to secure their future and their children's futures. She made it very clear that you are to be both guardian and trustee until your child comes of age. He paused, letting the gravity of it sink in. Your father can't challenge this arrangement without facing severe legal consequences. Your mother covered every angle. Isabella's chest tightened with the weight of just how deeply her mother had prepared for this moment. A sudden ache pulsed behind her ribs. She wished her mother could see her now, stronger than ever, but still craving a word of comfort only Eleanor could have given. So, it's all airtight? Harold gave her a small, reassuring smile. Yes, no one can touch it. Not your father, not Marcus. You and your child are protected. Always. Protected. The word echoed inside Isabella like a vow. She wasn't the same desperate woman who had once pleaded with Marcus not to walk out. Now she was a mother, one with the power and means to shield her child from anything or anyone that threatened them. Never again would Marcus make her feel small and helpless. Never again. As weeks melted into months, Isabella found herself more rooted in her new life, quietly preparing for the day she'd bring her baby home. Sometimes late at night, she wondered where Marcus was. Maybe still in that same dingy apartment, driving that old car, grumbling to anyone who would listen about how she had burdened him. Maybe he'd latched onto someone else, someone flashier, someone he thought could make him feel big. The irony stung. The woman he'd tossed aside was worth more than he could imagine. The child he never wanted would someday control a fortune beyond his reach. Most nights, Isabella pushed aside any temptation for revenge. Her baby came first. Her mother's gentle voice echoed in her mind. Money can solve problems, but not the ones that matter most. Still, on rare nights, in the hush between midnight and dawn, she'd allow herself one dark thought. One day, he will crawl back, begging for forgiveness I may never give. As her 7th month of pregnancy crept closer, Isabella faced all the familiar discomforts. Swollen ankles and aching back, restless sleep. But her mind hummed with fresh ideas and hope. She started discreet conversations about funding charitable projects, remembering her mother's constant advice. Use wealth for something that outlasts you. One idea shone brightest, a small, specialized library and support center for young mothers, blending her love for books with her compassion for women carrying burdens like hers. Harold encouraged her, though he gently reminded her not to push herself too hard. You have time, Harold reminded her gently. Focus on your health first. Everything else will fall into place when you're ready. One crisp morning, Isabella was jolted awake by the buzz of the penthouse intercom. Her heart thumped wildly in her chest. Could it be Marcus? Or worse, her father? She shuffled over to the monitor, pressed the button, and forced her voice to stay calm. Yes? It's Emily Carter, Miss Hartley, the doorman said politely. She says she's an old friend. Isabella's face brightened instantly. Emily Carter really was an old friend, one of the few who knew fragments of her tangled family history and had never once betrayed her confidence. Years ago, they'd spent a few high school summers together, volunteering at a neighborhood reading program. Send her up, please, Isabella said, her mood lifting for the first time in days. Moments later, Emily stepped into the penthouse, her eyes wide as she took in the sweeping city views and elegant decor. Wow, Isabella, she breathed, spinning slowly in place. You weren't exaggerating when you said you had a little family money. Isabella laughed, waddling over to wrap her friend in a careful hug. Trust me, if it weren't for my situation, I'd probably still be in that tiny old apartment. She led Emily into the living room, where they both sank onto the soft couch. Emily set a small paper bag on the coffee table and grinned. Brought you pastries. Figured you might be craving something sweet. She winked. Pregnancy perks, right? Isabella poured them both steaming cups of tea, her hands automatically drifting to her belly. Better, honestly, she admitted. More settled, but definitely not over Marcus. Emily's smile faded into a tight frown. She had been furious when she first found out how Marcus had tossed Isabella aside. "Have you heard from him at all?" she asked softly. "Not a word," Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the small twist in her chest. Part of her still wanted him to call, wanted to hear him apologize, beg her forgiveness. But another part dreaded how easily that could rip open wounds she'd just begun to close. Emily reached out, her warm hand resting reassuringly on Isabella's arm. "You deserve so much better. You know that? And if you need anything, baby shopping, errands, or just someone to sit with you, I'm here. Whatever you need." Isabella's eyes shimmered with grateful tears. She squeezed Emily's hand and managed a trembling smile. "Thank you. Actually, there is something you could help with. I've been thinking about starting a small foundation or support center for young mothers. Prenatal care, counseling, job resources. I'd really love your ideas." Emily's eyes sparkled with excitement. "That's an amazing idea. Of course I'll help. Let's start sketching out a plan soon." When Emily finally left, Isabella lingered in the living room, still feeling lighter and more hopeful than she had in weeks. For the first time in weeks, Isabella found herself looking forward to something that wasn't tangled up in the bleak memory of her broken marriage. She had a prenatal checkup scheduled for the following week and decided she'd use the outing to scout possible locations for her center too. But the next day brought an unexpected shock. A firm knock at her penthouse door, and when she opened it, she was staring straight into the unmistakable face of Edward Lancaster, her father. Isabella froze, her heart caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. It had been years since she'd seen him, and yet he looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, with an iron-straight posture, silver hair combed immaculately back, and a crisp suit that likely cost more than her old apartment's yearly rent. The gold watch on his wrist glinted under the foyer light as he studied her with that boardroom-calculated gaze. The sight of him, so polished, so untouchable, made her stomach twist with a childlike ache she hadn't felt in years. "Hello, Isabella," he said, his voice controlled and even. "May I come in?" She hesitated, every instinct warning her to slam the door shut. Memories crowded her mind, birthdays he'd missed, her mother's tears behind closed doors, the years of silence that hardened her trust. But after a heartbeat, she stepped aside. "Of course." Edward stepped inside, his sharp eyes sweeping over the penthouse's tasteful decor and panoramic city views. "I see you've made yourself at home," he said, his tone unreadable. Isabella crossed her arms over her chest, standing her ground. "Mr. Whitman helped me get settled." "Harold is a loyal man," Edward said simply. He moved to the large window, standing with his back to her at first. When he finally turned, his gaze dropped to her belly. And for the first time in her life, Isabella saw a crack in his stern expression. Something almost tender flickered there. "You're carrying my grandchild," he said quietly. Isabella's hand instinctively cupped her bump, a wave of protective instinct tightening her spine. A part of her wanted to shield her child from this man's world, a world of cold power and conditional love. But another part whispered that maybe, just maybe, people could change. "Yes, I am." Edward's shoulders sank just slightly. He drew in a measured breath. "Isabella, I know I've never been the father you deserved. Your mother and I had our conflicts. But I want you to know, whatever you need now, I'm ready to provide it." She stared at him, her emotions swirling so fast she couldn't pin them down. Anger, hope, suspicion, they tangled in her chest, burning behind her ribs. "And what do you think I need from you, Father?" He cleared his throat, uncomfortable for once. "Financial support, to start. Connections, protection from intrusive media. I understand you might resent me, but I don't want you to face this alone." Her first instinct was to snap back that she didn't need a cent of his money, that she could handle everything herself now. But she stopped. Harold's words about her mother's quiet hope for reconciliation drifted through her mind. And in her heart, she knew one truth. Standing under the Lancaster name's legal shield might keep Marcus far away if he ever tried to claim a right to her child he didn't deserve. "I appreciate the offer," she said at last, her voice calm but firm. "But let's be perfectly clear. I won't be your puppet. If you want to be part of this baby's life, it will be on our terms, mine and this child's." Edward nodded once, and a faint glimmer of relief softened his severe features. "I understand, and I will do my best to honor that." They spoke for nearly an hour, keeping it mostly practical: her health, her due date, gossip that might surface in the press. Edward promised to secure the best doctors for her and offered additional security if she wanted it. Isabella, though wary, recognized the practical advantages of reconnecting with her father, if only for her child's sake. Over the next couple of weeks, Edward visited her a few more times. He even accompanied her to an upscale maternity boutique, insisting on paying for an armful of baby clothes and nursery items, despite her embarrassed protests. It felt almost surreal, strolling through rows of tiny onesies and soft blankets beside the man she had once dreaded seeing, bonding, if only a little, over the idea of a grandchild. Part of Isabella's heart softened when she caught glimpses of genuine pride in his eyes. It made something twist painfully inside her. A little girl's forgotten wish that her father would once hold her hand in public, beam at her the way he now beamed at her unborn child. But she kept her emotional walls firmly in place. She couldn't forget the father who had missed birthdays and rarely called. Still, she let herself consider that maybe people could change, or at least try. Meanwhile, Marcus stayed pointedly absent. Through shared acquaintances, Isabella caught wind of rumors that he was dating someone new and loudly bragging that he'd finally gotten rid of the dead weight. The words sliced deep, but they also stoked her resolve. Marcus was the past, and if he ever crawled back, he'd find a woman he wouldn't recognize anymore. Amid all these tangled emotions, Isabella made a bold move. She chose to get more involved with Lancaster International, at least to learn what her child would someday inherit. Edward arranged a discreet meeting with several senior board members, eager for her to get a first glimpse of how the company operated and what philanthropic doors it could open. The meeting began awkwardly. Older board members eyed her bump and whispered behind polite smiles. But Edward stood beside her, introducing her firmly as his daughter, and making it clear she would have a voice, especially on the charitable side of the business. Isabella quickly earned quiet respect by asking sharp, thoughtful questions about corporate ethics, charitable spending, and employee care programs. Inside, her pulse raced with every question she posed, afraid she might stumble and look foolish. But each approving nod from a board member gave her courage she never knew she had. She didn't pretend to know everything, but she made it clear she intended to learn and to hold the company to high standards. At the end of the session, a senior board member named James Caldwell approached her, lowering his voice with unexpected warmth. "You have your mother's resolve," he said kindly. "We all respected her so deeply. She was the conscience of this company. It's good to see you here." Isabella blinked back a sudden wave of tears. For a heartbeat, she could almost feel her mother's hand on her shoulder, whispering that she was doing just fine. "Thank you. I only hope I can live up to her example." She left the glass conference room that day with her shoulders squared and her chin high. Her baby would have a safe, stable future, and she would make sure Lancaster International used its vast wealth for causes her mother would have championed: education, affordable housing, better healthcare access. Yet back in the quiet corners of her penthouse, Isabella still wrestled with the ghost of Marcus. She thought of how easily he had mocked her, how carelessly he had shoved her into the storm that night. Each day she grew stronger, but the wound he left inside her heart refused to seal completely. Maybe it never would. Still, Isabella forced herself to stay grounded in the present. Her life had turned a corner for the better: wealth she never flaunted, family connections however complicated, and a secure, hopeful future for her baby. She had blessings she once thought she'd never see. Yet a stubborn question lingered beneath the surface. Would Marcus ever come looking for her again? And if he did, would he come for her heart or for her newfound fortune? The thought haunted her restless dreams, replaying that cold night he'd thrown her into the rain. But Isabella promised herself, if he ever showed up at her door again, he wouldn't find the same naive girl waiting. She could feel a storm gathering somewhere on the horizon, and this time she'd meet it head-on, armed with every lesson, every resource, and the unshakable will she'd forged in heartbreak's fire. The next chapters of her story would not be a tragedy. They would be about strength, redemption, and maybe, if fate allowed, a taste of revenge. Weeks rolled into months, and then the day finally came. Isabella went into labor late on a snowy Portland evening, the penthouse windows glazed with delicate frost patterns. She had just wrapped up final details for the Mother's Resource Center she planned to launch, a promise she'd made to herself and to the baby who gave her new purpose. A sharp pain cut through her abdomen, stealing her breath. The contractions came next, powerful and relentless reminders that her world was about to change forever. Edward Lancaster had insisted on hiring a private car service with medical staff on standby to ensure Isabella got to the hospital safely and without fuss. Emily Carter, now her loyal confidant and de facto doula, rushed to her side, helping her gather her overnight bag. Harold Whitman was there too, calm and meticulous, making sure every hospital form and insurance paper was perfectly in order. For a fleeting second, as another wave of pain gripped her, Isabella felt a stab of sadness that she wouldn't have a devoted husband's hand to hold through it. But she refused to let Marcus's absence sour the miracle about to unfold. The SUV, more like a rolling luxury ambulance, glided through the snowy, hushed streets toward Portland's top-tier maternity hospital. Isabella focused on steady breaths, fear and anticipation tangling together as tears of relief slid down her cheeks. She had never felt so exposed, and yet so powerful. She was about to bring new life into the world on her own terms. The labor was long and exhausting. For nearly 12 hours, Isabella fought through each contraction, each push. Edward wore a path in the hallway, ignoring staff suggestions that he wait in the family lounge. Emily stayed glued to Isabella's side, squeezing her hand, whispering encouragement, brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. Harold, dignified as ever, politely but firmly ensured that no curious staff or nosy reporters invaded Isabella's privacy. Finally, with a final soul-deep push, a cry split the air, sharp and strong and impossibly beautiful. "It's a boy," the doctor announced warmly. Isabella's head fell back against the pillow, tears spilling freely as they laid her son in her trembling arms. His tiny face was scrunched and flushed from the fight to breathe, his fists curled tight against her chest. He weighed just under 7 pounds, small, perfect, and utterly hers. In that moment, the whole world faded away. All that existed was the tiny, perfect boy resting against her chest. The love that bloomed in Isabella's heart was unlike anything she'd ever known. She pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead, letting tears of pure joy slip down and mix with the warmth of his soft cheek. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her spirit pulsed with a fierce, protective fire she'd never felt before. He was hers, entirely hers, and nothing would ever separate them. Outside, dawn was breaking over Portland, brushing the skyline with strokes of pink and gold. The next few hours blurred together. Nurses bustling in and out, doctors checking charts, Harold signing off on final paperwork to ensure everything remained private. Edward stepped into the room at last, moving almost hesitantly. He stood at Isabella's bedside, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "He's beautiful," he murmured, fingertips grazing the baby's fine hair. Isabella managed a tired smile, her cheeks flushed, her voice a rasp. "He needs a name." She had turned over ideas for months, something that might honor her mother or symbolize a new beginning after so much pain. She wanted his name to carry strength and hope, something she herself had clung to during sleepless nights when fear gnawed at her resolve. Emily, perched at her side, offered gently, "What about James? After James Caldwell, your mother's dear friend at the company?" Isabella considered it, then shook her head softly. "James is lovely, but it doesn't feel right." Harold cleared his throat, thoughtful. "Your mother always adored the name Theodore. She said it meant gift of God." Recognition flickered in Isabella's eyes, followed by a rush of warmth. She looked down at her baby, a tiny soft miracle swaddled against her chest. "Theodore," she whispered. Then with a tender smile, "Teddy." Edward seemed satisfied with the compromise, though when Isabella added Theodore Hartley Lancaster, his brow arched slightly at the inclusion of Marcus's surname. She explained, gently but firmly, "Hartley was a part of me when Teddy was conceived. He deserves to know exactly where he came from, both sides, no secrets." It stung to carry Marcus's name forward, but Isabella knew it was the right choice. Teddy would be her hope, born from heartbreak. Proof that love could be stronger than betrayal. And someday, when he was old enough to ask, she would tell him everything. The truth about his father, and the greater truth about how fiercely she had fought to protect him. For the first week, Isabella remained in the hospital's secure private suite, never far from her son. Outside, the city hummed with rumors about Edward Lancaster's heir, but tight security and Harold's watchful presence kept reporters at bay. Isabella ignored every interview request, fiercely protective of Teddy's first days of peace. Finally, it was time to bring him home. She bundled Teddy in a soft, cream-colored blanket, breathing in his sweet baby scent as she stepped into the penthouse again. Every corner now overflowed with baby gear: cribs, monitors, rocking chairs, while nurses and a night nanny rotated shifts, courtesy of Edward's overbearing concern. Isabella felt both grateful and suffocated by it all. She longed, in quiet moments, for the simpler life she'd once had. Just books, quiet evenings, and dreams untouched by money and scandal. Late one night, after she had rocked Teddy to sleep and laid him gently in his bassinet, the penthouse intercom buzzed. Isabella frowned, glancing at the clock. Nearly 11 at night. Who could be visiting at this hour? She pressed the button, heart skipping a cautious beat. Yes, Miss Hartley. There's a gentleman downstairs. He insists he knows you. His name is Marcus Hartley. Isabella's heart slammed against her ribs. Marcus. After all these months of silence, he had finally shown up. Her mind spun with questions. Was he here to beg for forgiveness? To reclaim what he'd thrown away? Or had the whispers of her wealth and the baby drawn him back like a moth to flame? She forced a steady breath. Send him away, she said sharply, her voice ice-cold. A part of her ached to face him. Let him see with his own eyes the life she'd built without him. But another part recoiled at the idea of him near Teddy, near this haven she'd fought to protect. The security guard hesitated. Miss Hartley, he's causing a scene in the lobby. He says he won't leave until he talks to you. Isabella squeezed her eyes shut, and for a heartbeat, she was back in that storm, pregnant, terrified, and alone as Marcus shoved her into the rain. But that woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger. Fine, she said coolly. Send him to the lobby lounge. I'll come down. Adrenaline fired through her veins as she turned to the nanny. Keep an eye on Teddy. I won't be long. She slipped into a tailored navy wool coat, the fur-trimmed collar brushing her jaw like armor. Inside the private elevator, she practiced her calm mask in the reflective doors. She was in control now. Marcus didn't have the power to shake her anymore. And if he tried, security was waiting. When she stepped into the plush lobby lounge, she spotted him instantly, pacing near the marble fireplace, shoulders hunched, suit wrinkled, hair too long, and eyes hollowed by exhaustion. The cocky swagger she once knew was nowhere to be found. At the sight of her, he froze, eyes wide. Isabella, he breathed, you look different. She strode toward him, each click of her heels crisp and unwavering. What do you want, Marcus? He dragged a shaky hand through his hair. Can we talk somewhere private? She folded her arms tightly across her chest, her stare like stone. This is private enough. Say what you came to say. His gaze darted around the elegant lounge, the discreet doorman posted nearby, the quiet whir of a security camera overhead. I've been hearing things. That you came into some money. That you had the baby. The bluntness stung, but Isabella didn't flinch. Yes, I had a baby. A boy. Not that you ever asked. Not that you cared enough to be there. He flinched as if struck. Isabella, I know I messed up. I was in a terrible place. Work, money, everything was falling apart. I was under so much pressure and I lashed out at you. I was a bastard, but I want to make it right. She arched an eyebrow, her voice steady as stone. Why now? You threw me out into a storm when I was 6 months pregnant, Marcus. I begged you to calm down, to talk to me, and you shoved me out like I was nothing. You called me worthless, and now I'm supposed to believe you've suddenly grown a conscience? Marcus looked genuinely remorseful, but his eyes kept flicking around the lavish lounge, lingering on the marble, the subtle signs of wealth. Things were bad then, Isabella. Chaotic. I was under so much stress, but I see how wrong I was. I want to step up now. I want to be a father to our child. Anger thundered in Isabella's chest. It clawed up her throat, mixing with the phantom taste of rain and tears she could never forget. You don't even know your son's name, he faltered, his lips parting but no words coming. No, you're right. But that's why I'm here. I want to make things right. I want to try. Once, those words would have shattered her resolve, back when she was naive enough to hope he could change. But not anymore. Now she saw the truth. The drunken nights, the cruel insults about her pregnancy, the betrayal that had almost destroyed her. Could a man like that really change? Or was he here because he'd caught wind of the Lancaster fortune, the penthouse, the name she'd taken back for herself and her son? "It's too late, Marcus," she said softly, but with iron beneath the words. "You abandoned me. You abandoned your child. We don't need you anymore." Desperation clouded his face. "Please, Isabella, let me see him, just once. I have a right to see my son." Her eyes flashed like cold steel. "Don't you dare talk to me about rights. You gave up any right when you tossed me onto the street. If you want to fight this, go ahead. You'll find out very quickly that my resources are far deeper than you could ever imagine." Marcus's face drained of color. He stumbled back a step. What are you saying?" She moved closer, her voice low and lethal. "I'm saying you have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm a Lancaster. My son is the Lancaster heir. If you so much as try to push your way into our lives, I will bury you in court battles and restraining orders. You will never get near us." He swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling like ash. I thought maybe we could talk. Find a way to be a family again." A bitter laugh nearly escaped her throat. Family. The word tasted sour when tied to him. She thought of the bruises on her spirit, the lonely nights, the fear she'd once accepted as normal. A flicker of pity sparked and died inside her, because she knew he would never feel the same depth of shame that still burned her awake some nights. "Marcus, you're too late. I have a family now. My son, Emily, my father, the life and legacy I'm building for Teddy. You're not part of it. You never will be." Across the lounge, the doorman cleared his throat, watching the scene from a respectful distance. Marcus glanced at him, panic flickering in his eyes, before snapping back to Isabella. "I won't give up," he muttered hoarsely. She stared him down, unwavering. "This conversation is over. If you have more to say it through my lawyer." And with that, she turned on her heel, ignoring his stammered pleas behind her. She stepped back into the elevator, the polished doors gliding shut like a final, merciful curtain. Her knees trembled, fury and relief mixing in her veins like wildfire. But inside her chest, her heart felt stronger than ever. She had faced him at last. And she had won. She had faced the ghost of her past and come out stronger for it. When Isabella returned to the penthouse, Teddy was still sound asleep in his bassinet, his tiny chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm. She leaned over, brushing a fingertip through the soft fuzz on his head. A single tear slipped down her cheek, but it wasn't grief this time. It was fierce, unbreakable resolve. She would protect her son at any cost. Marcus Hartley would never hurt them again. What she couldn't know was that Marcus's desperation would soon push him to darker lengths, threatening everything she'd rebuilt from the ashes. In the weeks that followed his unwanted visit, Isabella threw herself into motherhood and into her true passion, her philanthropic project. The Mother's Resource Center, now officially named the Eleanor Lancaster Memorial Center, was set to open in a beautifully renovated townhouse in a family-friendly neighborhood. With Emily Carter by her side, Isabella organized parenting classes, childcare support, counseling, and partnerships with local hospitals for referrals. It was more than charity. It was personal, born from her own messy, lonely journey to motherhood. Edward Lancaster remained a steady, if formal, presence. He never overstepped but quietly backed every plan, financially and logistically. When opening day came, he even joined Isabella and Emily to cut the ceremonial ribbon. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and Edward gave a rare, heartfelt speech praising his daughter's dedication to families in need. When the word proud left his lips, Isabella felt a sharp, unexpected warmth, a glimpse of the father she'd always wished for. For a fleeting second, she allowed herself to believe they might heal old wounds after all. But beneath her success, a shadow loomed. Her firm rejection had clearly rattled Marcus. More than once, she'd spotted a lone figure lurking near the penthouse entrance, vanishing when security turned to look. There were calls, too, blocked numbers, long silences on the other end. She knew it was him, lurking at the edges of her new life, waiting for a crack in her armor. And yet, tonight, she refused to let fear ruin what she'd built. The center's opening gala sparkled with soft music from a live orchestra, clinking glasses and polite laughter. Isabella moved gracefully among Portland's wealthiest CEOs, philanthropists, and public figures, answering questions about the center's goals and her future plans. She wore her confidence like a crown, her past self a ghost she no longer owed anything. Then, just as she lifted a glass of water from a passing tray, a ripple of uneasy murmurs swept through the ballroom. Near the grand entrance she spotted him, Marcus, pushing through the crowd, desperation carved deep into his features. He looked wildly out of place in a wrinkled suit jacket, eyes darting from face to face as guests turned to stare. Security moved to intercept him, but Isabella lifted her hand, a silent command to stand down. She wanted this, right here, right now. Across the shimmering ballroom, their eyes locked. Isabella drew herself to her full height, radiant and unshakable under the glittering chandeliers. Marcus paused, suddenly smaller than he'd ever looked to her. Around them, murmurs spread. Is that him? The ex? The one she rebuilt her life without? Isabella didn't flinch. Tonight, she would show everyone exactly who she was now, and exactly who he no longer had the power to break. Tension buzzed in the air. Phones were raised discreetly, cameras flashed, capturing every second of the scene unfolding under the ballroom's glittering lights. So this is it? Marcus spat, stepping closer until they were only a breath apart. Your big revenge plan? Humiliate me in front of half of Portland? Isabella's lips curved into a calm, razor-sharp smile. Her voice cut through the hush like crystal. No, Marcus. I'm just living my life. You're the one who barged in uninvited. He let out a brittle laugh, the sound echoing uncomfortably off marble and glass. Living your life? Surrounded by money, power, secrets you kept from me. You never deserved to know, she replied coldly. All I ever wanted was a simple life, a real marriage. I hid my wealth so you'd love me for me, but that was never enough for you, was it? Marcus's face flushed a deep, angry red. The cameras kept clicking, capturing every bitter word for the gossip sites to devour. You're unbelievable, he sputtered. Without missing a beat, Isabella turned slightly, lifting her chin so her voice carried to every corner of the hushed ballroom. This man, she declared, her tone crisp and unwavering, threw me out into a storm when I was 6 months pregnant. He called me worthless, and now, seeing me here tonight, he expects sympathy. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Shoulders turned, whispers flared. Somewhere near the stage, Edward Lancaster stood silent and stone-faced, while Emily Carter clutched her phone, recording every word for the world to remember. In that moment, Isabella felt the weight of every tear she had ever shed crack and fall away, exposed for the world to see, but powerless to hurt her anymore. Marcus's eyes darted wildly, reading the horror and judgment written on every stranger's face. You're twisting it, he hissed. I was under pressure, Isabella. She stepped closer, eyes blazing. You made your choice, Marcus. Now I've made mine. I will protect my son from the man who discarded him before he ever took his first breath. Her voice trembled at the edges, not from fear, but from the fierce certainty that he could never touch her life again. She turned away, lifted a hand, and security moved in like shadows. Marcus tried to protest, but his voice cracked uselessly as 2 guards guided him firmly toward the exit. His pleas echoed across the polished floors, chased by the blinding lights of dozens of camera flashes. Isabella's heart thundered inside her chest, but her face stayed composed, regal. For the rest of the gala, she moved among her guests like the queen she'd become, untouchable, unafraid. Every whispered praise, every supportive nod from strangers felt like a balm on the scars she once hid beneath polite smiles. By the time the last notes of the orchestra faded, social media was a storm. Clips of her public confrontation played on loop. Headlines screamed Lancaster heiress shames estranged husband in dramatic showdown. Public sympathy poured in for the Eleanor Lancaster Memorial Center. Even skeptics who had once whispered that Isabella's charity was for show now praised her for exposing Marcus's cruelty without flinching. And yet, when she slipped back into the penthouse that night, when she fed Teddy his warm bedtime bottle and rocked him gently to sleep, the fierce rush of triumph faded, leaving behind a quiet ache. Revenge had its power, but it could never erase the scars he left behind. As her son's eyelids fluttered closed, Isabella brushed her lips over his forehead and whispered into the silence. You'll never know that pain, my love. I promise. In the days that followed, Marcus vanished from public sight. Rumor had it he'd been fired after his meltdown at the gala went viral. Gossip columns claimed the new woman he'd bragged about left him too, unwilling to be seen with a disgraced man who lost everything the moment he lost her. Isabella should have felt triumphant. She had exposed Marcus for what he was, stood her ground, and protected her son at every turn. But instead, when the cameras faded and the crowds dispersed, she felt only a quiet emptiness deep in her chest. The taste of victory was strangely flat on her tongue, no matter how many headlines sang her name. Maybe that's the cruel twist of revenge, she mused late one night as Teddy dozed in her arms. It fills the headlines but leaves your soul hollow. Only the steady rise and fall of her baby's tiny breaths reminded her that some scars would never belong to him, and for that alone, she had done enough. Still, life marched forward. Teddy cooed and giggled, filling her penthouse with baby laughter that stitched up wounds better than any apology ever could. The Eleanor Lancaster Memorial Center flourished too, serving dozens of women who needed the same support Isabella had once prayed for. Sometimes, as she walked its bright hallways, she caught glimpses of her old self, scared, unnoticed, and felt an ache of pride for how far she had climbed. Slowly, Edward Lancaster and Isabella found their rhythm as father and daughter again, mending scars one conversation at a time. Her work drew attention across the city. Invitations arrived for her to speak at charity galas and women's leadership conferences. She found herself stepping into a spotlight she used to run from, and now she wore it with grace. By the time the custody hearing finally arrived, the local news was buzzing with headlines. Lancaster heiress in courtroom battle with estranged husband. Paparazzi crowded the courthouse steps as Isabella stepped out of a sleek black SUV, dressed in an elegant tailored suit Teddy balanced confidently on her hip. She looked serene, her composure unshakable despite the chaos around her. Inside, though, her pulse beat like a drum, echoing every doubt and memory of the girl who once pleaded on a stormy porch for Marcus to love her. Inside, the courtroom crackled with whispered gossip. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, his shoulders hunched, hair unkempt, and eyes dull from sleepless nights and bad decisions. His lawyer, a tired public defender, shuffled papers and avoided Isabella's calm stare. Across the aisle, Isabella sat flanked by her legal team, Harold Whitman, and two discreet security guards. The judge entered, called the room to order, and one by one, testimonies painted the truth in stark black and white. Isabella's attorneys laid out the texts, the police reports, the neighbors' sworn statements describing the night Marcus threw his pregnant wife into a storm. The Resource Center's manager testified how Marcus had tried to smear Isabella's reputation with baseless rumors. Marcus's defense was pitiful at best. He pleaded that he'd been under pressure, that he was sorry, that Teddy deserved a father. He painted Isabella as controlling, accusing her of using her fortune to lock him out of his son's life. The judge listened carefully, face unreadable, gavel tapping softly now and then as lawyers traded arguments. But when the final ruling came, Isabella knew she had won the moment she heard the words. Given Marcus's documented neglect, lack of stable income, and the vulnerable age of the child, unsupervised visitation was denied. If Marcus wanted to see Teddy at all, it would be under strict, professionally supervised conditions, and only if he could prove he was taking real steps to get his life in order. Therapy, steady support payments, no excuses. Isabella stepped out of the courthouse into a crush of reporters, bright flashes stinging her eyes. She ignored every shouted question, her head high, her arms secure around Teddy's tiny body. Marcus Hartley had underestimated her one last time, and now, if he wanted any piece of the family he had thrown away, he would have to fight for it through every legal gate she and her team would fiercely guard. But deep in her heart, Isabella doubted he had the strength to even try. Time would tell. Back at the penthouse, Edward Lancaster was waiting. For once, he didn't hold back. He pulled Isabella into a rare fatherly hug that caught her off guard. "Well done, Isabella," he said simply, but the quiet pride in his voice meant more than 1,000 speeches. She sank into the embrace, realizing just how far she had come, from a terrified, pregnant girl standing in the pouring rain to a mother who had secured her child's future, her own dignity, and her place in a world that once tried to break her. Later, after laying Teddy down for his nap, Isabella stood by the tall windows, gazing out at the Portland skyline twinkling under the early evening stars. She remembered the young version of herself, anxious, uncertain, desperate for love she thought would last forever. She never could have pictured this, forging alliances, running a thriving resource center, steering the moral compass of Lancaster International. Life had dragged her through heartbreak and rebuilt her stronger than ever. Emily Carter stopped by that evening with takeout and a bottle of sparkling cider to celebrate the court victory in their own quiet way. They clinked their glasses on the couch, soft laughter filling the penthouse. "A toast," Emily declared with a teasing grin, "to Isabella Lancaster, the fiercest mom in the entire Pacific Northwest." Isabella laughed, warmth blooming deep in her chest. "I'll take that title." Happily. In the weeks that followed, Marcus never once attempted to schedule supervised visits. Word trickled back to Isabella that he had quietly left Portland, maybe chasing a fresh start somewhere far away. Maybe he'd finally accepted he was beaten, or maybe he'd plot another scheme. But for now, she had peace. Peace to pour her love and energy into the people who deserved it. Teddy, her father, the mothers who came to the Eleanor Lancaster Memorial Center for hope and a second chance, and the tight circle of trusted friends she now called family. Her bond with Edward continued to deepen in ways she'd once thought impossible. The past couldn't be erased, but they made new memories watching Teddy learn to crawl across expensive rugs and babble at picture books. Edward even visited the center now and then, donating supplies and quietly mentoring young fathers who wanted to do better than he once had. Board meetings at Lancaster International changed too. James Caldwell, who still spoke of her mother with reverence, became one of Isabella's closest allies. Under their combined push, the company shifted away from its old profit-above-all mindset, investing real money into health benefits for workers and programs for underserved communities. For the first time in decades, the Lancaster name stood for something more than power. Through it all, Isabella never lost sight of what the storms of her life had taught her. She stayed grounded, refusing to let the glow of wealth define her worth. She gave generously, but she also demanded that every dollar create real, lasting change. One crisp autumn morning, Isabella stood at the community playground attached to the center. Teddy's chubby fingers wrapped around hers as he toddled unsteadily over the soft mulch, squealing at the colorful slides and other giggling children. Nearby, young mothers gathered, some with newborns resting against their chests, others pushing strollers or swapping advice over warm coffee. Isabella's eyes caught a teenage girl lingering shyly at the edge, gently rocking a stroller but too afraid to step closer. Isabella's heart squeezed at the sight, because she knew that uncertainty so well. She walked over, introduced herself with a kind smile, and led the girl to a circle of laughing mothers who welcomed her without hesitation. Moments like this reminded Isabella exactly why she'd fought so hard, why she'd endured betrayal, heartbreak, and public scandal without losing herself. She had done it for Teddy, for herself, and for every woman who'd ever been tossed aside and told she didn't matter. As Teddy squealed with delight at the top of the slide, Isabella blinked back grateful tears. This was her true victory. And it was only the beginning. She thought of Marcus only fleetingly, wondering perhaps if he ever lay awake at night, regretting the blessings he had so carelessly thrown away. But in the end, Isabella knew one simple truth. Her life was far better without his poison shadowing it. She had a future to build, a future that sparkled with possibility, rooted in the resilience she'd unearthed inside herself and the boundless love she poured into her son every single day. Looking down at Teddy, she whispered, her voice steady and soft, "We made it, baby boy. We really did." In that quiet moment, autumn leaves rustling overhead, children's laughter swirling in the crisp air, she knew her story had shifted forever. From tragedy to triumph, Isabella Hartley Lancaster, once a frightened, discarded wife, had become the author of her own fate. And no one, not even the man who had tried to crush her spirit, could ever steal that away again. Isabella's journey reminds us all that, even in life's darkest corners, resilience and love can light a path forward. She began as a humble wife, blindsided by betrayal, but through tenacity and the unexpected inheritance of a billionaire legacy, she discovered a power that had always been hers to claim. The mother she became, shielding her son while opening her heart to uplift countless other women, is proof that strength lives in us all, waiting to rise when we need it most. If Isabella's story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. By sharing her journey, you help shine a light on the transformative force of hope, courage, and compassion. Together, let's remind the world, no heartbreak is final. No betrayal has the last word. And no matter how dark the night, a new beginning always waits on the other side. So the story is over, and my wonderful friends, are you still here at this hour? If you are, I believe it's because something in Isabella's journey touched a part of your own heart. Maybe you've been betrayed. Maybe you've stood alone in your own storm, carrying hope for tomorrow when today seemed unbearable. Let's take a breath together and hold on to what this story really means for us. You are stronger than the hurt done to you. You are worthy of love that does not break you. And no matter who tries to write your ending, you alone hold the pen. Isabella's life reminds us that sometimes life cracks us open to show us the iron we have inside. Betrayal may bruise us, but it does not own us. Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. Khalil Gibran. Her scars didn't make her weaker, they made her unstoppable. Look at her. A mother, a leader, a quiet warrior, rewriting a name that once brought her pain. She rose not by revenge alone, but by turning her wounds into a place of healing for others. And that, my friends, is the greatest triumph, turning heartbreak into hope for someone else. So tonight, if you carry your own scars, remember, your story is not finished. Like Isabella, you can rise, you can protect your peace, build something beautiful from the ashes, and light a path for the next soul who needs to believe in second chances. If this story meant something to you, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. By doing so, you help carry this message of resilience and love further into a world that sometimes forgets it. Thank you for staying with me till the end. From my heart to yours, may you stand tall, may you heal deeply, and may you always remember you are the author of your own beautiful, unstoppable story. Good night, and see you in the next true tale that proves hope always finds a way.